Our story from this week comes from a book that's near and dear to my heart and was since childhood. Woody Allen's Without Feathers. He wrote three of these books back in the day that were basically on everybody's shelf. There was Getting Even, Side Effects, and then Without Feathers. And they were, mostly just essays. Occasionally there was something like a full-blown scripted short story, and we did one of those, the Kugel Mess episode a long time ago. But a lot of them were just sort of designed to be read in the New Yorker, and they were just funny pieces. And Side Effects has some really, really, really funny just pieces of writing, right? There's one that's called No Kaddish for Weinstein, which is sort of a spoof of academic biography, really incredibly funny. There's another one called The Horror of Mensa, which is like, it's a Chandler story, but the femme fatale is actually just girls talking about literature. And then there's a story that I think is the funniest one of all, which is called If the Impressionists Had Been Dentists. And I don't know, Walter, do you want to summarize the story? There isn't really much of a summary, but do you want to take a whack at it?
Well, what's important is to describe the method of the story, right, because nothing really happens in it. One thing happens right at the very end. But the conceit, the comic gimmick is that these dentists are corresponding, but they're using the language of art history and what we know about the Impressionist artists and painters. So the letter writer is really
it's Vincent and Theo. It's Van Gogh and his brother, right?
Vincent Van Gogh and his brother.
Yeah,
but the pretense is that they're dentists.
Right.
And the pretense is really that they're Jewish dentists.
Exactly.
Or at least they have a Jewish clientele. Yes. Okay? Because it's just that 60s and 70s Jewish humor. Mrs. Schmackley, she comes in with her bridge. She says she doesn't have time, her poodle's sick, whatever. It's that you can hear the Woody Allen urban, ethnic, just one generation past immigrant, Jewish patois, and so on. But it's a very elevated vocabulary.
Right.
And that's what makes it funny. It's a milieu that's every day. What could be more prosaic than Jewish dentists and they're complaining, and sometimes beautiful clients. There's one who's beautiful because her teeth meet perfectly.
Right, exactly, yes.
But they give them the sensibilities and the vocabulary of these artists who, you've got to realize at the time, in the 60s and 70s, America, in a mass way, and in the 50s, was educating itself. Everybody came back from the war. One country went to World War II. They came back and they all had the GI Bill. So my mom, let's say, who went to college in the late 50s, or my dad, they're catching up on things like who are the Impressionists and James Joyce and so on. In other words, America became pretentious in some ways.
Right.
And that pretentious language of, that's kind of associated sometimes with the Upper West Side of New York and Columbia University, really.
I was going to say that it's Woody Allen's favorite background. Unfortunately, it really did become his favorite background at the end of his life. He lost his ironic view of it.
But what do they think of him now?
Exactly, yeah.
Woody Allen, try walking across the Columbia campus.
Carrying this book,
with your wife.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in this correspondence between Vincent and Theo, the two dentists, they talk about their dental work. I do most of my work now in dental floss. I need money. Basically, they're pleading for money. How can I do my work otherwise? Or how come nobody appreciates me? So in one of the letters, he talks about how he I don't know, arrange the teeth of one of his clients in a fiery, impressionistic way.
Yeah, let's just read from the very first letter. Dear Theo, will life never treat me decently? I am racked by despair. My head is pounding. Mrs. Saul Schwimmer is suing me because I made her bridge as I felt it not to fit her ridiculous mouth. That's right. I can't work to order like a common tradesman. I decided her bridge should be enormous and billowing, with wild explosive teeth flaring up in every direction like fire. Now she is upset because it won't fit in her mouth. She's so bourgeois and stupid, I want to smash her. I tried forcing the false plate in, but it still sticks out like a starburst chandelier. Still, I find it beautiful. She claims she can't chew. What do I care whether she can chew or not? Theo, I can't go on like this much longer. I asked Cezanne if he would share an office with me, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on like that. And you get the joke in the first 10 seconds, but he executes it just over and over. And it's just
over
and it's
over.
Laugh out loud funny constantly.
What are all the things that American, it's GI Bill era, learned about these exotic, European and maybe depressed bohemian impressionist painters? They were always worried about money.
Right.
But they fell intensely in love, and the letter in which he falls in love and adores one of his patients, to me, is the funniest of all of them.
Oh yeah, where is that one? Well, let me start with one that is about the poverty. Dear Theo, once again I'm in need of funds. I know what a burden I must be to you, but who can I turn to? I need money for materials. I'm working almost exclusively with dental floss now, improvising as I go along, and the results are exciting. God, I have not even a penny left for Novocaine. Today I pulled a tooth and I had to anesthetize the patient by reading him some Dreiser. Help, Vincent. Let's see. Dear Theo, I am in love. Claire Memling came in last week for an oral prophylaxis. I had sent her a postcard telling her it had been 6 months since her last cleaning, even though it had only been 4 days. Theo, she drives me mad, wild with desire. Her bite, I've never seen such a bite. Her teeth come together perfectly, and so on and so on.
And this is translated into dentistry, the moment when great artists, Picasso or whatever, fall in love with a model.
Right? Yes. Yeah.
She's my muse.
Right.
Now, why is this funny? I mean, we can get to that in a minute, but maybe we haven't read all our favorite parts yet.
Well, no, keep going. Yeah. Why is it funny? I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons that it's funny. First of all,
the reasons are sociological.
Okay. Go ahead.
Why is dentist why did he pick dentist? What is it about the job of dentistry that making it pretentious is funny? Why? I mean, you could do what if car mechanics were dentists or were impressionists, and they could talk about their lube jobs and oil changes and fixing a tire in these florid terms. But why wouldn't that be as good?
Because there is just a hair of this in the mind of a dentist.
Exactly.
I think, right. and he's just driving a truck through that lane.
And why is there a hair of it? Because dentist is the immigrant leg up job. In other words, in the let's say you immigrated to the United States, whenever, and you're living on the Lower East Side, and you're Jewish or whatever. You have a tailoring shop, or you have a shoe shop, or whatever. But what do the kids become? Dentists.
Exactly. That's the way they climb up in the world.
Right.
There's a key letter in here where disappointment happens, and this is the tragedy that leads to the ear situation with Vincent. Dear Theo, all is lost. Today being the day I planned to ask Claire to marry me, I was a bit tense. She was magnificent in her white organdy dress, straw hat, and receding gums. As she sat in the chair, the draining hook in her mouth, her heart thundered. I tried to be romantic. I lowered the lights and tried to move the conversation to gay topics. We both took a little gas. When the moment seemed correct, I looked her directly in the eye and said, "Please rinse." And she laughed. Yes, Theo, she laughed at me and then grew angry. Do you think I could rinse for a man like you? What a joke. I said, please, you don't understand. Anyway, and it goes on and on from there. But there's just so much funny stuff in here. There's a whole thing in there about how he meets Toulouse-Lautrec, and he's a very talented dentist, but he's too proud to stand on anything, so he's constantly like trying to reach into people's mouths because he's too short to do the procedures, you know. You're exactly right. It's funny because you know, in the mind of every dentist is a little bit of the wow, you know, that's a work of art. That I did just there, and
right.
It's just blown all out of proportion. Now, at the same time, it's an incredibly funny indictment of the sort of the way that Impressionist painters talk to each other, and
what it is a satire of. Mm-hmm. To reformulate what I said earlier, is Americans at large becoming educated about these topics. You know, this was the period. It's like the scene in Annie Hall when Marshall McLuhan comes up to Woody Allen, who's giving some pretentious spiel to his girlfriend, you know, and Marshall McLuhan, the professor of media studies, who, if you were intellectually ambitious and from Queens, you know, would be somebody you'd be reading constantly, actually appears.
He's right behind this sign here. Yeah.
Actually appears. You know, this was America on the rise intellectually, and it's touching given what Columbia has become, because this is that period in which we all wanted to read a better book, join the Book of the Month Club. Oh, there's a good movie from the director Fellini, or, you know, one of these Europeans, Bergman. Have you seen the latest Bergman film at the Film Forum? You know,
and that's one thing about Woody that I always wondered about, because I believe him 1,000% when he says he loved W.C. Fields movies, Marx Brothers movies, you know, but he you know, he goes on and on about watching The Sorrow and the Pity and 8½, and everything, and I'm not 100% sure. Although, look, he's quite a good director. And
he traced the same arc that American bourgeois culture traced. He first of all, he was lovingly pretentious for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was he was able to elevate American forms, you know, Buster Keaton, the Marx Brothers, and so on. You know, he saw them in a way, not just as popular entertainment, but as art.
Mm-hmm.
Because as he started to learn about art, he said, wait, this is kind of where I am with Donald Trump, to be honest. I'm like, wait a second. You're not appreciating the genius of the American grassroots art forms, salesmanship, and being a huckster and a negotiator and a tough guy and a, you know, pimping out. Those are all American art forms. And this guy has purposed them for politics, and he's succeeding. Wow, that's interesting to me. That's how Woody Allen was when, you know, he was being honest about his taste. But then he got to a point where he actually got high on his own supply and became pretentious himself, and was like, I want to make movies like that are like Bergman movies, like existentialist, black and white, elusive, kind of boring, you know, conversations about death.
Yeah, I mean, some of those movies were just puzzling, you know. Some of them I really liked,
right?
But you know, when I always think about, there was a description that Nabokov had of Gogol, talking about how, you know, he was happiest when he was pottering alone on his private abyss, you know, thinking up these weird stories. And I think Woody Allen was always happiest in this format, right, where he's just making jokes. You know, movies like Love and Death, where it's just one punchline after another, and I think all that stuff came completely naturally to him.
He became solemn.
Yes, he became solemn.
And America is in a way the cartoon form of civilization,
Mm-hmm.
and that's its genius and its limitation. People who are offended by Trump are really offended when I say, well, at least he hasn't committed the one sin, the unpardonable sin in America, which is being boring, okay, which is being solemn, which is just mouthing things that you've heard from other high status people. Woody became acclaimed as an artist for being in the tradition of Groucho and Buster and
Perfectly in it, by the way.
Road Runner and
Mm-hmm.
cartoons and so on. And then he decided he was going to parlay that into becoming a high status, uh, auteur.
Right. Yeah. And what we are talking about is his movies, but when we talk just about his writing,
he wrote his movies, so his movies
he wrote his movies, but his prose. One thing that I think is really interesting about Woody Allen, and not every writer is good at this, but he's a fantastic mimic.
Yes,
he is able to, within range, within reasonable range, imitate basically any author, and use the words that they would use, and
especially those authors who were, like I say, America was discovering through its sort of post GI Bill education. So Russians like Dostoevsky,
exactly.
He can be depressed or serious and philosophical like Dostoevsky. He really can imitate all those artists and writers who were really in vogue in 1964.
Right, and all of the philosophers who were in Commentary magazine and in the late 60s and early 70s.
Right.
He was really good with all that. So that makes it very easy for him to do this kind of satire, which is just, well, let's just do a Raymond Chandler novel, but about this, or let's make a Russian novel, like Love and Death is basically just a series of it's really a Zucker Brothers version of Russian literature.
But really, what he really did was, and I mean, I have to be able to talk this way. It might sound like it comes from an older era. It does, but I think it really works. He made What If the Impressionists were Jewish guys from Queens?
Yeah, exactly.
Kvetching about money, saying, "Have you seen this new girl?" But doing it in the sort of mode of abstract impressionism and the predicaments that we know those artists got into. And he would take this way of being, and he would insert it into all these culturally odd contexts, solemn Russian novels, melodramatic, love and death. But the Woody Allen character from wherever Woody's from, let's just say it's Queens.
Yeah.
Comes
from under the roller coaster in Coney Island.
Right. Yeah. And other writers of his time who are many of my favorite writers. I mean, Joseph Heller, obviously, but Philip Roth. All of them seem to have been kicked out the back door, by the way, for some sin or infraction that they invented in the same academy these people were loving. And Roth lived long enough to write books like The Human Stain and stuff that really dealt with what was going on campus. But he comes from Newark, the intellectually ambitious young Jewish man who maybe is second or third generation and who takes on, American culture, is one of the greatest parodic moments. Because what did Joseph Heller do? He took World War II, he took the war novel, and he turned it into a series of bits.
Yeah, a slapstick comedy. Right. It was like a Three Stooges meets Kafka meets
Yes.
whatever, right?
Yes.
Like, and it's a uniquely American way to do it. That's why I think the American humorists are terrific. They're some of the countries are better than others. With humor, the Russians were really good at it. I think the English were really good at it. But the Americans always. People like Woody Allen, what was so great about it is they had this, they were unafraid to be completely silly. That was one big virtue of theirs. But the other thing I just really appreciate about him, and I know because I've tried to do this kind of stuff in the past. You have to study really hard to do this kind of mimetic writing where you're trying to invoke how somebody sounds and what words they use.
You have
and all
to
those
know
other
so
things.
much about it that
Exactly.
that you can be natural in it.
Right. It's not. It is. Most people when they do it, they kind of half-ass it. They don't realize that it's the little tiny details that make these things sing.
Yes.
And what I always liked about Woody is that he put in the extra work to make these bits make you laugh, because that's the difference. The difference between kind of like an 80% well rendered sentence and a 100% one is like whether the person laughs or not. And he was good at getting laughs.
Parody is the sincerest form of flattery in some ways.
Oh, of course.
Because you have to study the target so well. And you almost have to admire them in the first place to study them that hard.
Mm-hmm.
And the successful parody causes you to know the subject almost better than they know themselves, such that you pick up on their little habits or their little tics or their pretentious qualities or whatever. And it's a form of love to be irreverent because in the parodic fashion, because it means you are just absolutely beguiled by the subject. You have to love Russian literature to know it well enough to make fun of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't do Love and Death and not have read all the way through to the end of Anna Karenina and War and Peace, right?
And you don't do that as a job, okay?
Yeah.
You do that because you actually love it at some level.
You love it. Yes, exactly.
And in a reverse kind of perverse way, you're showing your love for it by by tweaking all its flaws and its habits and its codes. We were talking about learning codes earlier. That's what parody really is. It's pitting one coded way of talking against another. So you're pitting the way they talk in Sunnyside, Queens, or whatever, versus the way they talk at Columbia University.
Yeah, and for me, and this is kind of a final thought on the whole subject. We have a new pope. The pope was chosen.
Oh my gosh, this is perfect, Matt.
Hang on.
I get to see whether my bet is right.
Hang on a second.
Oh, they're not telling us? They're just telling us they have one? Oh, and the accidental white seagulls come right then. Those are the most trained seagulls in the Catholic Church.
Excellent. I love it.
But,
all right. Well, we don't know yet who the Pope is, but it's been chosen. So that's
Matt. If I got my prediction right, I feel like waiting here until we find out.
I know, but I mean, God knows how long it will take. But that's pretty funny.
But as to our parody discussion, because these things stimulate me way more than politics. Mm-hmm. You did a great example of this earlier in the show without knowing it. You said, "What if choosing the Pope was the NFL draft?"
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yes. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah.
And you took one lingo, one language, one symbolic language, the language of the white smoke and so on, and you translated it into this stupid little set of chimes that they do on TV.
And then you would see the highlights of the Pope just tearing through the A gap, right, to sack the quarterback.
And then you'd have sports radio discussions after they choose the Pope, like, yeah, I love the African guy, but you want to know, in the end, he just didn't have stamina, and this is a game of stamina. Being Pope means day after day you go to church. Three times a day.
You know what, doggy? I disagree with this. You got to go with the best Pope available. They chose for need, not, it's all that stuff. But anyway, just to wrap up my point, the stuff, these stories that Woody did, and these little essays, and to another extent his movies, they had a really important function in society, which is to puncture the balloon of the upper class, right? And when you don't get that, when there isn't successful mockery of pretension and that sort of thing, you get actual class war, you get anger, and you get a situation like we have right now. Like, the humor has not been directed. Successfully directed at the upper class in this country in a while, and
no, it hasn't.
And I think we're missing that.
We're really missing that. It's a problem for society. First of all, life's always going to be painful and unfair. I agree. With John F. Kennedy saying it was unfair. But it doesn't have to be no fun. And
right.
they've made it no fun. One of our great coping mechanisms and delights in life is satirizing people, especially those who have more power than us. That's cutting them down to size. It not only is kind of relaxing to think that they have the same problems. The ultimate and simplest form of parody is to show that some beautiful person has a wart.
Yes.
And if you don't do that, you start envying them. You start thinking they're perfect. You start thinking they actually are as powerful as they pretend to be. You forget they're a human being. You get angry. As you say, you start having all sorts of conflicts, using the energy that you would have had, that you would have used just to laugh at them.
Yeah. And this is an upper class that is exquisitely built to be laughed at. And we haven't seen it.
Even kings knew
yeah.
that they had to give their subjects an opportunity to laugh at them, or there'd be a revolution.
Right. Yep. Heads on sticks.
America is going to be healthy as long as it's irreverent.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as long as it's irreverent toward the institutions that the rest of the world takes too seriously.
Yes.
Aristocrats, religious types, political.
The Pope.
The Pope and so on.
The Vatican, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That doesn't mean we're bad.
Right.
That means, as I said earlier, it's the sincerest form of flattery. It means that, we study and we're preoccupied and are attracted to these things so much, though, that we know them better than they know ourselves. We see their flaws, and we feel in a democratic society that there's one thing we all have the right to do, besides maybe vote, and that's laugh at
at you.
Big
yes,
pompous
exactly.
asses.
Right. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad we got to read that one. I would recommend the whole book, but if you want to just go with that one, it takes just a few minutes to read, and it's totally worth it. So.
And for the nerds out there,
mm-hmm.
go and see if you can find an edition just like the one Matt showed you, a little paperback pocket edition, which was the native form of publishing these books. One you could shove in your back pocket and read on the subway, even if you aren't living in a subway part of the country, because that's how these were meant to be consumed.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. I think they were less funny even in the New Yorker than in these books.
Exactly.
All right, Walter, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for hanging out, and we will see you next week.